Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with jazz vibes master, composer, and bandleader Joe Locke. We caught him on the road in the UK to talk about his latest 2018 CD, Subtle Disguise, and we discuss what's been going on in his life. For several years now, Joe has had two musical purposes. One, to speak in a vernacular which reaches people, and two, to continue challenging himself as a player, writer, and arranger, and it's all been working out quite well. Joe made it clear that this album would not have come to actualization if it were not for the band that he assembled for the project, and he will explain that. So the music on this disc is both personal in nature and unintentionally has a political thread that runs through it. He's gearing up for a CD release celebration on November 17th in Boston, Massachusetts, and this album will be available on Origin Records on November 16th, 2018. So get to know Joe a little bit more and this great new album. Hi, Joe. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man.
I got to tell you, to this day, I'm on 630-plus interviews with Neon Jazz, and I will never be able to shake the vivid imagery of that cat that was pulled from that engine in Russia.
Oh, my God, right?
Oh, what a beautiful story. Yeah.
Man, I still, it's funny, that I forget what happened the other day, that someone was talking about Russia again, and those stories came back. Man, I have so many stories like that from, it was like one or two or three tours where just those kind of anecdotes just kind of pile up on one another,
It's the beauty of life, man. It's the beauty of traveling. It's the storytelling, really.
It's always the case when you're in the thick of it, you just want to get out of it, but in retrospect, they're great stories,
That's when the pressure cooker happens.
Exactly, man.
So let's talk a little bit before we get into the latest album, which could be one hell of a celebration because you're going to be releasing this on November 17th in Boston, and if everything works out, you're going to have a happy town.
Oh, beautiful, man. I'm really looking forward to playing Boston with the guys, man.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of, there's some things I want to hit on this album, but I just want to know overall, you had mentioned if it wasn't for the cast of talented people that you have on this album, there's no way it would have happened. Talk to me about this project.
Wow. I talk about this record how I feel about this record is that I've always felt like I had a side that was the more sort of roots side of myself, the one that was informed by playing the clubs I played as a teenager and having this kind of direct sort of musical vernacular that would speak directly to the audience, and so we're very sort of blues imbued, really straightforward kind of musicality. And then on the other side, I had this sort of composerly kind of need, to get more sophisticated and write more and get into some more through composed forms. For example, I did an album called Lay Down My Heart a few records ago, and that was specifically meant to be really direct, really like an album for folks, come home from work, put on the record, feel better, The album after that was called Love is a Pendulum, and that was a really composed suite of music based on a poem. And there's a lot of composition in that one, and I feel on Subtle Disguise, on the new album, the two sides of my musical personality have kind of come together in one. I found my voice that the two parts aren't fighting each other, and I feel like this record is the best kind of evidence of that thus far. So I'm just really proud of this record, man. I'm really happy with the writing I managed to get done, how the guys interpreted that writing, and I'm also really happy with the stuff on the album that's really just imbued with the blues and is really direct, and that's why I say I chose the material that I didn't write, and the stuff that I did write, I'm happy with the writing I did, but the success of the record really comes down to the artists who bring it to life, and we can talk more about that as we go on.
Absolutely. Well, it says, one of the major things that I read in your bio leading up to this album, or in explaining this album, is that you've had two musical purposes. One, to speak in a vernacular which reaches people, and two, to continue challenging yourself as a player, writer, and arranger. How is that going? It seems like this album has hit both of those.
I find that both of those impulses come together on this album. A piece like Red Cloud or a piece like Subtle Disguise, They're my inclinations as a composer, and to keep challenging myself as a writer are very much present. But on pieces like Who Killed Davy Moore and Motherless Children, there's that direct, speaking in that really direct vernacular is present. And to varying degrees throughout the record, from song to song, you have those sort of the coming together of those two impulses. I think it really worked on this album.
So how did you get all these talented musicians together? You got Jim, Lauren, and Adam, and David Benny, and all of these players. How did all of this come together?
Man, I feel, just speaking about the core band on the album, I feel really, really fortunate for the first time to have a band of musicians who all really have a wide scope in their musical interests and abilities, and can play anything. Sam Bell, the drummer, Lauren Cohen, our bassist, and Jim Riddle, the pianist and keyboardist in the band, are all really very interested in all different forms. Everything from really traditional playing and just swinging hard to playing stuff that's classically imbued or has a rock edge, or has a lot of composition to it, different meters, and they're just really, really capable of playing anything. And even more importantly, they're just lovely human beings who really come to serve the music. And it's the first time where I've had a band where everyone has lived in the New York City area, so we can get together and we can workshop the music. Get together at my house. I can put a big pot of stew on, and we can just get down for hours. I had a band previously with Terry Young Gully, Jeff Keezer, and Mike Pope. One guy lived in Maryland, one guy lived in California, and one guy lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was real hard to get together. So it's wonderful to have a band where all the members are basically in the same area, and we can develop the music, we can workshop it, and everyone really wants to get together to work on the music.
With this album, you have personal songs, and then you also have a political thread that goes through these songs. Talk to me about why that's so important, that there is kind of a political voice that goes into this release.
I didn't plan for there to be any kind of political thread running through this record. I really didn't. I was putting together music, either writing music that was gestating within me, or thinking about songs I would like to do. For example, I feel really fortunate that Raul Midon, the great singer-songwriter, is on this album. I had Who Killed Davy Moore, the Bob Dylan song, in my back pocket, and I thought, wow, that would be beautiful, to get Raul to sing that one. And Motherless Children, I had been thinking about as a piece that I thought Raul would just, knock out of the park. But both of those songs, actually, Davy Moore is an actual true story about Davy Moore, who fought the featherweight championship against Sugar Ramos in 1963 and was hit so hard he later died. And the song is about all the passing of the buck that went down the line, of people saying, "Don't blame me, it wasn't my fault." The manager, the referee, the audiences, the sports writer, and it's a metaphor for me of passing the buck that's going on so much in the world today. And it just, I saw it as a metaphor for our times, Yeah. I mean, Motherless Children, I didn't think of putting Motherless Children on the album for a political reason, but we recorded the song around the time that kids were being ripped from their mothers at the border, at the southern border of Mexico and the United States, and it just became such a timely, sort of a theme. And I can't help when talking about, when I'm introducing the song, to at least allude to that fact, in case it may go over people's heads, that this isn't just a blues song which it actually is. It's a blues composed by Blind Willie Johnson in 1927, but it speaks to now in a very poignant way. So there's a political thread that runs through this album, but I didn't compose the album in that way. But it seems there is stuff on my mind, and I think sometimes that rise to the surface because they need to rise to the surface, whether you consciously intend them to or not, you know?
Well, and the interesting thing about it is it's almost this intersection of improv by the nature of jazz and the fact that history is a carousel. So you can inadvertently and intentionally get to that point where we're dealing with the same things that we've dealt with for decade after decade in different contexts.
You know, it's very interesting that there was a piece that I read. It was the intro to the 2018 anthology of American short stories, and the guest editor, she wrote the introduction to the anthology, and she says that she was writing it a couple of months after the election of Trump, and she said, I didn't feel I couldn't write. She said, I felt like, what's the use? What difference does it make? What difference does art make? I should be out. The only thing that makes a difference now is my body out in the streets marching. Then she gives this beautiful sort of, what's the word? She writes this beautiful kind of essay on why it is important. And she talks about that that we as artists, you know, have to hold a mirror up to what's happening, and that we're really reporters in the field. And that gave me a sense of, you know, for myself who was struggling, you know, after the election with what difference does what I do make. It was helpful to read that piece of hers and to see it's important for us to, you know, express our feelings about what's happening in the world through our medium, whatever that is, whether it's literature, music, film, you know, whatever it is. So maybe in some small way, I'm doing some reportage here. And if it's, I think if people want to, you know, to take that in, that aspect of it in, then they can. And if they just want to listen to the music and not hear that narrative, then maybe they can tune it out. Although I'd rather they not.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the hallmarks of humanity is our resiliency, and I think that alone can, in concert with what artists do, can really mean a lot, because that's the key.
Yeah, I sure hope we're resilient enough. I surely do.
Yeah, I do too. So it's one thing to hatch an album in a studio and release it, but it's another thing to get out and to actually perform this live for folks. And those that have listened to jazz know that hearing a CD is a totally different beast from actually seeing it live. This is going to have to be a joy for you to actually construct this in front of a live audience.
Oh, yeah. It's such a joy. We did it in the spring. We did it at Dizzy's in New York City with guests, you know, with Adam Rogers and a fantastic vocalist named Paul Jost. We're going to be doing it in Boston on the 17th of November. We have dates scheduled, you know, for Europe in 2019, and we'll be doing it at the Jazz Standard this spring with Adam Rogers and Raul Midon and the core band. And yeah, there's nothing like this music is, I'm so proud of the record, but the music, it's such a great experience to play it live and to play it in front of a receptive audience. Yeah, it's the kind of music that, you know, as with any music I love, you know, it hits all the chakras, you know, head, heart, and below the waist, as I like to say, you know. Yeah. So it's a blast to play it live, especially with these musicians.
I think that's a great high note to end everything on. Joe, thanks for taking a minute out to talk about Subtle Disguise. Good luck with the performance of this album. I really appreciate your time, and I always love your music, man.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thanks for the support, man.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in the UK, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Joe for his cool, his music, and his time. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at YouTube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.